Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So, we have with us, directly over that way, Mala. How you doing, Mala?
Good evening, everyone, and happy holidays.
And we have directly that way, Mike.
Good evening.
Mike, ducking and weaving.
Hello. What's that? Bobbing and weaving. Yeah, bobbing and weaving.
Right. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Try not to do the opposite.
Athletic database person. It's a rare thing.
So, Shop Talk, we're near the end of the year. But just in case it's your first time here, welcome. Welcome to Shop Talk. It's Monday. We've had a day. I've had a day. Definitely a day. Unfortunately, the day will continue on for a while after Shop Talk ends. But nonetheless, the whole idea
Sounds like
is
an undeterministic day.
it's very determined. It's definitely determined, and it's determined to be bad. So, Shop Talk, in case you are not familiar with it, is a general let's talk about stuff type of show. A little bit of question and answer from chat, a little bit of topics, themes, mostly derailings from chat. We welcome your derailing. But if you have any questions, SQL Server, data platform, life in general, get them in chat. Life in general questions, get life in general answers, which probably wrong, but hopefully interesting. So what we have tonight, we've got a couple of topics. First topic, elections. We did have tri-pass board elections, and I intended to send out a message saying, hey, congratulations to the people who ran because you won. But then I got sick. I'm still getting over being sick, which is probably why my voice sounds a little different today than normal. That's my excuse, at least. So we had 3 open positions. President is this guy. Vice President of Marketing, which is Rick Pack, who is not here tonight. Treasurer, Mala. All 3 of us, amazingly, ended up getting reelected. I was actually a little surprised that nobody even gave us a troll no. It was 100% yeses, which means we're doing even better than Saddam Hussein. Because he only got like 99% of the vote. So we get 100% of the vote. So I'm going to put that on my resume. Better than Saddam Hussein. A pretty low bar, admittedly, but also I seem to have survived longer than him. Baghdad Bob approves. That's right. That's right. They're... Oh man, Baghdad Bob. That was a fun time. Just there was a website that was like, we love the Iraqi information minister, and I enjoyed seeing Baghdad Bob. He brought a smile to my life. Back in those happy days when I don't know, just you could make fun of a guy who absolutely saw everything crumbling around him and steadfastly refused to admit it. That was a good guy. I'm biting my tongue at any follow-on jokes around that. So let's instead talk about some SQL Server stuff.
I need to Google this Baghdad.
Well, this is clearly why when you interview DBAs, you make them show you that they can bring the database back up. Not just be optimistic about it, but actually do it.
Right. Yeah, Mala, that was from the Iraq War 2003-2004. This was the guy who stood in front of the cameras and was like, American troops are being defeated en masse, and we've essentially routed their attack while Baghdad was burning in the background.
Oh, the Iraqi information minister. Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, that was his. That was the colloquial
you have
nickname.
Much better memory than I. Oh, yeah, we used to see that, way back home too. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So, tonight's topic, totally unrelated. I'm calling the siren song of reusable queries. Because this is a thing that I believe that most developers really want to do in the SQL Server world. And that's because it works so well in other programming languages. That is encapsulating code. I have a piece of code that I have written. I need to use it in one place, but then I need to use it in like 5 other places. So why not make that reusable? That thinks the developer. And there's a couple of ways that I would do that in application code. I might create a function. So naturally, you go look up, oh, SQL Server has functions. So I'm just going to create a function, and that function will do the work that I need to do, and I'm going to call it every time I need to get results. And so developers start writing these functions. Sometimes they have functions inside of functions because, more encapsulation is more better. And this is perfectly reasonable in a structured programming language. And hey, the S in SQL is, structured. A structured query language. However, then it gets to production. Everything falls apart. Performance is awful. I don't understand why. I mean, it worked in development where I had 5 rows, and they're just functions. If I wrap a function call around some bit of code in C# or in VB or Java or whatever other language, Python, pick your poison, it's not going to change the performance profile in any measurable way. Let me say in any other than microscopic measurable way, just in case there's some language where wrapping this in a function makes it half a microsecond slower. Just gonna play on the safe side. So you have this result, and in the SQL world, it goes from working okay to being absolutely awful performance-wise. And so usually then that's when somebody, like probably one of you fine folks in chat, gets a call and says, hey, something's gone really sideways. Why is my performance so bad on this database? And then person comes in, takes a look, says, I see why. It's because all of your queries have 9 function calls. Those function calls each then have embedded function calls. Those function calls have more function calls, and you're doing all of this work here. And then we talk about issues of parameter sniffing. Yes, that can be a problem with it. Even expectations about number of rows returned, and simply the way that code gets executed. So the execution plans that are generated, because this function was expected to return back 1 row and return back 9,000 rows, or 2.5 million rows. So you have problems like non-sargeable predicates, you have problems like parameter sniffing, you have other issues like Mike not being able to speak.
I can speak. I'm just being very dramatic.
You just chose not to. You went Marcel on us.
Sargable really gets me going. It's an easy win.
You've got these base problems with trying to build out all of these functions, and then okay, fine. You realize maybe functions aren't the best thing, but there's something in SQL that is naturally there in SQL. It's a view. A view is just a saved query. And so we create views. And instead of having to write several joins or write some complicated logic, great, I'll just put it in a view, and then I'll join that view to my tables. Now, of course, over time, I have views that join to other views. And then inside those views, as they get more complicated, perhaps I want to encapsulate some more and have views that reference views, which themselves reference views, and so on down the list. And then, again, database person gets a call someday. It says, hey, I don't understand. I'm just doing a select top 5,000 star from DBO dot really cool looking view where record equals X. And for some reason, this is taking me 4 hours.
Right.
And so, start going down into viewception. You know, so this is where you look at the execution plan, and when the execution plan requires a magnifying glass, and not the magnifier that's on the Management Studio or in Plan Explorer, but actually once you have that, then you get your own physical magnifying glass and put it up to the screen so that you can actually see anything. The plans that go on into perpetuity, I can show you some of those someday, but I've worked with some nasty ones. And say, I found your problem. And show the plan. It's like, I don't understand. I don't know what I'm seeing. Yeah, neither does the optimizer. It basically gave up on you. Hey, this nested view with nested views of nested views, the optimizer looks at this and says, nah. Look, if you're going to write your code this way, you don't want performance. And just gives up and says, even though you reference the same table 14 times, I'm just going to go scan it 14 separate times instead of scanning it once, because you get what you deserve. So that's the optimizer being very finicky, or, I don't know, aggressive, maybe passive-aggressive. Definitely passive-aggressive if there are index spools. If there's an eager spool in there, yeah, that's SQL Server being passive-aggressive, like, hey, I think you should get an index. I'm not going to tell you to get an index, but I think you should get an index. Hat tip to Eric Darling for that analogy, because I love that analogy of spools as SQL Server's passive-aggressive way of telling you, maybe you want an index. I don't know. I'm not your real dad.
So if I just
Mala, you're on mute.
Oh, I am?
Mike,
you're not on mute.
I just want to say Eric Darling has
Mala's
one
on
of the
mute.
best energies.
Oh, she's not on mute, but I can't hear her.
So that's really a nice one.
Yep. Everybody else could hear her, Mike. Okay, so we have this problem with views. We have this problem with functions.
Now I can't hear you. Okay, wait a minute.
Uh-oh. Mike has lost his ability to hear. So functions and views, not only are they going to cause you performance problems, they're going to cause it so that Mike is not able to hear us anymore. That's a double whammy. And what we end up with is just this horrible mess where you have this bad performance, and the answer is not encapsulating. And as a developer, it is painful, because now I'm repeating code, and now I have to go update code in all of these different places. And it's true. It is a pain point in SQL Server, or in SQL in general. I think this is not just a SQL Server thing. This is any relational database, if you throw enough wackiness at it, is going to eventually fall apart on you. And that SQL Server it happens to be that I know where those limits are a lot better than I do with other database platforms.
So, can you hear me now?
I was able to hear you the whole time.
Oh, weird. So just to recap, so like functions, you're abstracting too many layers away for you to like effectively handle as it scales. Views, another issue with views is obviously if you have too many different layers, performance is a problem to even troubleshoot, because the optimizer isn't really going to give you valid or accurate information, or information you can act on for views. So is that where you left off?
Yeah, pretty much. That with views, it's not that the view itself is a problem. It's that as you have more views, you're oftentimes going to have the same table showing up repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you wrote it as a single query, if you wrote your view as a single query and did your best to optimize it, probably don't have the same table as like 7 different points in the same join, or in the same from clause and set of joins. If you have a large enough number of tables, then the optimizer does not try to collapse down that list. Eventually it just says, fine, I'm going to include the same table over and over and over. I'm going to keep scanning from it over and over because you referenced it 8 different times. So you're going to have 8 different scans from this table. Even if a human can read that query and say, no, it really is supposed to be one join of that, or one scan of that table. And it just happens to be that many of these views have that base table. So you'll often see that with lookup tables. You'll see it with, like a customer table or a states table or some lookup information that is used in a lot of different views. So a view on its own, not a performance problem. A view which references other views, not necessarily a performance problem, but can get to be one. Once you start nesting, it's not that you will immediately have problems. With functions, you almost immediately have problems. SQL Server 2019 and SQL Server 2022 have improved scalar functions a bit. Inline table valued functions aren't too bad, but even so, those are still considerably slower than the alternative of not having a function. So that's an easy one. Don't have functions, performance is typically going to improve. With views, there is some leeway where, yeah, I have a view. Just because I'm querying from a view doesn't make it slower than the equivalent query from tables, from base tables. So that on its own, not so bad. It's when you have sufficiently large nesting that you've got a beefy execution plan, one which involves repetitive lookup of tables. So if all of your views just happen to reference different tables, like you have V1 inside of which is V2 and V3. V2 references tables A, B, and C. V3 references tables D, E, and F. And you select from V1. It's not going to perform any differently than ABC join A join to B, join to C, join to D, join to E, join.
So
yeah.
If I interrupt for a second, so this is the use case for us. So essentially, I'll give you a real-ish use case. So there's 10 or 15 developers that I work with, and clients come to us. We need heart surgeries, we need procedures, all the stuff that I've made mention of the past. And so we're moving from another database technology to SQL Server, and a lot of us do the same thing. So for example, I'm going to grab outpatient encounters for this cohort, and then the cohort slightly changes. Then and then I have another project. Well, the doctor wants to see, or the researcher wants to see, outpatient encounters for these patients over this time frame. So it's like, why wouldn't there just be like an encounter view that we can all hit? Because why are we all rewriting this outpatient encounters? The only thing that's different, generally speaking, if we agree on the columns, the only thing that's different is like it's for these 100 patients or these 5,000 patients or at these 10 clinics. So it's like parameterized. We created a parameter table in our prior database technology where you'd say select from this view or materialized view where the project name is X and the patient list is Y. So now we're all debating like, okay, do we do inline table functions, or do we do views, and what are the pros and cons? Also, our skill set is in table value functions, so we're all kind of learning that. It's like views are maybe better, but anyway, that's where we're at.
Yeah, all right. So, taking that as a starting point here, I guess I would say, why not have an encounters view? And the answer is, yeah, that sounds like a reasonable case for an encounters view. And if there's common agreement that this is what these are the base tables for this encounters view, and the differences are going to be what filters you put, what where clause you put in, or even you join that encounters view to other tables, that's not itself a bad idea. And so your view might even just simply be, I have taken this counters table and put in some initial filters that everybody's going to need these filters. We're going to select down to these columns. We're going to have where patients are active, or whatever criteria are common to everything. Great, save that as the view. That's your encounters view. That's not a problem. That will perform as well as the queries you write against it. And that's where I was saying that if your view is just a series of tables joined together, that view will perform exactly the same as if you ran the underlying table script.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ran that same select query against the underlying tables instead of from the view, no performance difference. Table valued functions are going to differ, and I would hesitate strongly before putting in any sort of function. Inline table valued functions, yes, they will perform better than alternatives, much better than multi-statement table valued function. However, they still have performance problems, enough so that if you're concerned about performance, my first goal would be find a way to not use.
Gotcha. Because we are very concerned about performance, because it's been a big issue, and we just spent $1 million on hardware, and like spending $2 million on hardware won't make it better, is kind of the tagline we're hearing. So we need to all read this book very carefully, and I'm gonna advertise your book too as soon as it comes. I have a ticket in the Springer link. So yeah, like, thank you for saying that, because we are talking about table valued functions, and there's 10 or 15 of us, and sometimes we do have projects that are like, 100 million records, 100, for one domain, like labs or vitals. We have vitals every 5 seconds for someone, like,
Right.
it's a lot.
Yeah. Now, if you're looking at that level, this is where I would be interested in. Gotta make sure that those query plans are good, that the actual queries that you're writing are in fact using appropriate indexes in an appropriate fashion, that you are filtering as soon as possible, knocking out as many records as possible, getting down to what you need as soon as possible. And those are going to take you a lot further than most other strategies. I think that's going to be initial, do this, make my life less of a pain later on, and will keep you out of future table valued function pain, because that's what inevitably happens. You will have pain with table valued functions. The only question is at what point you will have it, and if you were the one who caused the pain, or you just happened to be the schlemazel who was in the way. Yeah, exactly.
Dodge. No, that's good. That's good feedback, and I appreciate that. And I hope you're not charging us your $500 hourly rate. But because also just the layer of abstraction is, we are gonna, when you're troubleshooting stuff, I think there's also like a layer of like, okay, well, now I have to look at where the code is, and the function is kind of doing stuff they don't readily see, whereas the views are also a little bit, you extra step to find the data, but not too bad. And then this idea of like making sure that those, as this new effort comes out. So let's say there's 15 or so of these base views that we're going to build collaboratively. That's really great advice, that the query plan should be really strong for those base queries that are going to get reused by a lot of people, and that we should focus on, when we use those, on how are we going to be filtering down rows when we use these things. Like you don't want that base encounter table to be select star from encounters, because there's, I don't know, 100 million encounters. Like, you don't want to do that.
Right.
As the base use case.
Yeah. And if there are certain very specific cases that are extremely common paths, this is where having stored procedures may be helpful. Instead of functions, having stored procedures. I would not have a stored procedure that's essentially a generic fetch-all query, if you can avoid it. Generic fetch-all queries are very difficult to tune. You can write them, but they become a challenge to work with.
For stored procedures, or just in general?
Stored procedures. So what I mean by a generic fetch-all stored procedure, or a kitchen sink stored procedure, I think is what Erland calls them. The idea of, I have maybe 15 columns in this table or in this view, and I want to have any sort of generic search on a value equal to a column name, or equal to a column, or not equal to a column, or greater than a column, or less than a column, or less than or equal to, etc., etc. Where you want to make it so that somebody can perform any sort of search just calling the one stored procedure. It is possible to do.
It's kind of like the dynamic SQL solution they have at work, Kevin, although that's been better designed.
Yes, that's a better design, but it's also a design that took, 5,000, 6,000 lines of code.
Yeah.
And thousands of hours of diagnosing errors, of managing that code base, of troubleshooting, performance tuning. There's a reason that it's there, because that also supports hundreds of generic queries across an entire code platform.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you have that particular use case where you need that sort of scale, yeah, it's possible. You can get a pretty good answer. It's also something that took nearly 20 years to develop to the point where it is today. Yes, Solomon,
Wow.
that's what we're talking about.
I had no idea it took that long.
There's been quite a bit of change since you left, Solomon.
Buy your stock, sell your stock. Insider info, watch out.
Too late to sell the stock. Company's already been sold.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah, I remember that pain. Yeah, exactly. I remember the pain too. I haven't messed with the pain in years, at least a couple of years. But yeah, no, it's, if you're at that level where you need that kind of generic functionality, you can do it. But if there's any way to avoid it, avoid it. Like if this is 90% of the time people are searching, I just need to know where, maybe I need to search just for outpatient customers or outpatient clients.
Well, I'll admit, it's literally the first place where I saw paging in T-SQL implemented. I'm like, really? When I went, I saw it, really? This is what you guys do? And, when they showed me that, I was like, wow, I've not seen anything like that. I've never seen people write T-SQL code to do paging. Really.
Oh, yeah. T-SQL paging isn't incredibly common, but it is reasonably common. It is also a horrible pain to get a highly performing T-SQL paging query. Because offset fetch doesn't perform well.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't give you any real performance benefit,
Mm.
especially as you get more and more pages in. So the problem is that first page you can make fast pretty easily.
Mm. Mm.
Top in records, but
Mm.
it's page 6 where we have to scan this many
I know
records.
that's the
And
thing.
then,
You have to get all the 5 pages to get to page 6.
yes,
So,
yeah, and so there are ways to get to paging that's more efficient,
mm.
but not really good ways.
Mm.
Solomon says, I know it mostly worked, was a feat of engineering, but personally I didn't think it was worth the level of complication given the learning curve required by anyone who touched that stuff.
I was thinking about expertise when you were explaining it to me. Like, you got to have the right group to be able to even maintain.
Yeah, and Mala, you're on mute again.
I said I just completed documenting it in a lot of detail. I spent 2 months on it for exactly that reason that he said. And so I hope it will be a little bit useful, but I'm sure anybody who looks at it is going to find it mind boggling, and to overcome that feeling is going to take time.
Yeah, it's and so yeah, that's why it's not a thing that I would try to bring out into the broader world. I appreciate it for what it is, and also don't want to replicate it.
Surely not. But it's a brilliant piece of engineering for what the requirements were, Kevin. I'll give it
Sure,
to Wendy for
sure,
sure.
and it works. It does
Yes,
work.
yes.
I mean, it drives 8+ million queries a day, so not too bad. All right, so yeah, that's moral of the story here. Functions are evil. Functional programming is great. I had to just throw that second one in. Views, um, views are okay performance-wise as long as you don't nest them too deeply. You don't get too crazy of plans. And stored procedures, if you have common sorts of queries, having a stored procedure just to provide some functionality is generally a good idea. Inline TVFs are fine. ... Right? Yes, in the sense that instead of being an order of magnitude slower, they're just 3 times slower. And that's not even I'm not tongue in cheek here. That is my measurements in the past. I've seen same queries. Usually, if you take the inline table valued function out, replace it with an apply operator, replace it with a regular table, then or a temp table or something, then it can improve performance by a good 3x. But if you have multi-statement TVFs or say you've got scalar TVFs, or excuse me, not scalar TVFs, scalar user-defined functions, that those can easily give you 1 to 2 orders of magnitude worse performance. So, yeah, inline TVFs are the best of the bunch. And there are cases where you're going to want to use one. And also, these are user-defined. So if you're working with built-in functions, that's going to behave a little bit differently. There are optimizations available for them that you don't get in your user-defined functions. So all things to just keep in mind that if you're looking for that critical path in performance, inline table valued function is still probably going to be too slow if you can rewrite it a different way. If you're not looking for critical path performance, if you're just looking for good performance, and an inline TVF makes life a lot easier, yeah, that's fine. I would say never with multi-statement table valued functions, because the thought I've got on this is if you have something that needs to show in a multi-statement TVF, that feels like the type of thing where work on it in a stored procedure and not suffer the awful crippling performance problems as a result. And then just tell people to call the procedure.
Okay. This is super helpful. Use views and stored procedures probably.
Just to mention, even if only infrequently applicable, SQL CLR functions marked as deterministic and that are not doing any external access can perform well and not prohibit parallel plans. Yeah, that's a good call out, Solomon. That is something I did not mention. So, CLR functions that are deterministic, not doing external access. Yeah, and you'll see several of those in SQL Sharp. There's your call out for the night, Solomon. But that's a possibility as well, and something that if you have a shop willing to use CLR, if you have a shop where developers understand how to use CLR and can make the best of it, then yeah, that can even give you better performance than base T-SQL stuff. Like if you're doing things like string splitting, going into CLR has historically been the fastest approach. If you're doing structured programming logic, then going into CLR is going to make a lot of sense. And you can work on data in sets instead of having to do it row by row like you would with a scalar function, scalar user-defined function. So that's another opportunity. Given group of people, if they're not already going to be well versed in .NET and in SQL, at this point, I don't know that I would talk to them about CLR. Just because someone's going to panic. And all the changes in CLR that have made it more difficult for people to do what they need to do it the right way, makes it harder for me to recommend it. Which is a shame, because I do think CLR is a good use. It's a good platform for specific use cases, especially when it comes to high performance code. And that just, I know we've talked about this a few times on Shop Talk of what could have happened had the marketing been better on CLR and had DBAs not panicked at CLR. I think it could have done a lot better. But I think that just about covers the siren song of reusable queries. I liked that title so much I had to say it twice. So at this point, looking to see, I know Mike, you've got some discussion items, things that you want to know about. But actually, I see one more item on the docket here that I forgot about. So I guess we could talk about it. We'll talk about resumes. What works, what doesn't, what do you look for? So supposing you're hiring somebody. Let's say you're hiring somebody or you're reviewing someone who's a candidate. And what are things that as soon as you see it, you say, nope, hard pass. I'm totally out on this candidate. My favorite is knowledge of SQL Server 2003.
Yeah.
Now,
the fake year.
Yep, that was the fake version of SQL Server.
My favorite is literally multiple page resumes with the assumption that somebody is actually going to read 8, 10, 12 pages of your work history in a lot of detail. And I've been amazed that I've reviewed resumes for a lot of people, and I've been amazed at people who are seriously brilliant techies, MVPs, and people like that whose resumes are like, really, dude, what are you really thinking? I mean, it's like this big. It's like a little booklet. You can print a little booklet out of it. And it's like nobody has time for that kind of stuff, and nobody is interested in what you did at a job like 12 years ago, no matter how brilliant you were at it. Like, nobody wants to know all that. 1 or 2 pages max. Make your resume small. Make it crisp and appealing. Don't write your life history there, because nobody is going to read it.
That is a really good point.
Right.
My resume's got 1 page.
Right. Mine is 2 pages.
Yeah, I've forced mine to be 1 page for the last decade, and I can say I've got a lot of stuff. Now,
How many times you've been hired in the last decade?
how many jobs do I currently have?
Only teasing.
More than I'm willing to admit on camera.
That's the same here.
So it works.
That's the same here, because I was never afraid of switching jobs. So before I came to my current job, I had switched jobs every 1 to 2 years. And the guy who interviewed me, a guy out of Ireland, he was like, he got really paranoid over my resume, and he went over every line of my experience in painstaking detail. What did you do at this
That's
job?
actually good. Yeah.
Why did you want to leave them? What if you do the same thing here? Like, dude, I mean, he and I laugh about it even now. But it was by far the toughest non-tech interview I had ever done. I never thought any non-tech interview is going to be tough. I never thought it. I don't think that's normal. But boy, this guy was so anal, and I put him off with the fact that I had moved jobs. If I don't like what I'm doing, I'm not going to stay. So I moved a few times, and I was a DBA with 20 some odd years. I was looking to find something else to do. It was not easy until I landed here. So that's the short story. It's like, yeah, there is still a lot of old-fashioned mindset around moving jobs. So if you're going to be stuck with one of those older people like that, be careful. You're going to have a tough time at the interview.
Yeah, Red Nello makes a good point here. There are some people who confuse the curriculum vitae with a resume, and we're not interested in your life's work. That's a good point. You're not trying to get a job as a professor.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen, outside of academia, outside of, you are trying to get that professorship. I don't know I've ever seen a place where a proper CV is required, is necessary, because even if you say, oh, my resume is going to list all of the places where I've worked, I don't think you need to do that. But even if you do, you don't have to list, at this job I took backups, I made restores, I right-clicked in Management Studio, I left-clicked in Management Studio. Sometimes I tried to click both at once, thinking that it would be a middle click, but it turns out that it was just kind of like a right click. But I learned all about the power of right clicking and left clicking in appropriate sequences. And then I went to the next job and I took backups and I restored, and I only right clicked at that job. I didn't left click at that job. So And then at this third job, they actually switched my mouse around so it was a left-handed mouse, and that really threw me for a while, because I was so used to right-clicking, but then I had to left-click, and it just...
Well, one specific thing that I was talking to someone recently about is that sometimes the initial... this is what I think, and you guys get your reaction, is some of the first-line recruiters, like, very specific, are very, like, conscientious or paranoid about, like, the actual technology stacks. So, for example, if somebody wants a SQL developer or a Tableau developer or someone that does .NET, C#, so listing the skills in the vernacular of that space can be helpful, because sometimes if, like, let's just say you do database stuff and you kind of write that you do database stuff, but you don't put T-SQL or you don't put Oracle, you don't put, like, the first line reviewers might not even know that Oracle's just a flavor of SQL. You know, like, so if you put SQL developer multi-dialect, like you might want to be more specific because sometimes they like want a Tableau developer. I've talked to people who I told them that I would say in Tableau, I made up a number and I was like, I'm probably a 3 or 4 out of 10. I do it a lot. I mean, I work with people that's all they do all day and they can do like map blocks and, you know, I could do that. I just would need to like practice more. And they're, no, we're not interested. You know, like you need to be 9 out of 10. Or I was like, well, that's the person that invented it. So, you know, people were unrealistic sometimes. But anyway, that was one thing. I was reviewing someone's resume as a favor the other day, and I was like, I think that can be helpful because the first people that look at it probably don't understand the technology.
That
Sometimes.
can be a factor. It can be a factor, and more frequently, it's that the HR system is looking for specific keywords, and if you don't have those specific keywords in the resume, then your resume doesn't get anywhere. That can be a risk. It's a sign of garbage HR systems, I think, or of lack of flexibility or lack of concern about the position. But that's a factor. That's where you look at what the job description entails, and you say, okay, here's the 40% of the job that I have done previously, and have a keyword associated with it. And that doesn't have to be every job I'm going to copy and paste the same block of those items which are in your job description. But instead, maybe in skills, a skills section, maybe I focus on T-SQL. And focus. This is a resume. Resumes can be focused. If I apply to a position, I've worked at 9 separate jobs before, and this particular position relates to like 4 jobs, I have a little section, selected work experience, and so I can include selected work experience. This is not all of the jobs I've ever had. Yes, I worked at a bookstore. No, it doesn't matter for this position. Unless I'm taking a job working at a bookstore, or I'm taking a job maybe where I'm doing, say, database administration for a bookstore, and I can just include that as, hey, you know, this was me back in college working at a bookstore. And so if that role makes sense to include, okay, yeah, go for it. And then you can include in there with some of the tasks that you were doing, like Mala said here, just 2 to 3 lines of what the role entails. So not, I took the backup, I did the restore, but processes, savings, I optimized a process that saved 95% of backup time every day, closing the window down from 9 hours to 40 minutes. And that's the type of thing that a person who has some idea about what this role entails can look at it and say, oh, that's interesting, what did you do? And then assuming that you actually did it, not one of your coworkers did it, and you know, you did a code review and now you wrote it on your resume, that you're able to talk about, yeah, here's what happened, here's how I used buffer count, max transfer size, we were writing different files, we had multiple backup drives, and you found all these different ways to tune backup performance, started compressing all the backups, yada yada. Finding all these different ways of making those backups faster, reducing that window size, and just improving conditions. Well, over the course of that, you've hit several potential keywords: backup and restore, SQL Server, things like that, while having something that is interesting to a human. And you can do that in 1 line. So, tailoring that resume, getting it specific to the position, and cutting it as far as you can, and then cut it like 20% more. because reading through resumes, every line you write is a line that potentially I get to call BS on as a manager. That I'm looking at this and I'm saying, oh, you are an expert in Polybase. Fantastic. Let me start asking you some questions. Let me ask you stuff that I don't know the answer to. Hey, so I've got these performance problems with Polybase where this is happening when I've got a scale out group. Like, oh, well, when I said expert in Polybase, I mean that I created an external table once. Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, expert compared to whom?
Well, yeah, that's also the classic line of probably don't want to call yourself an expert.
Oh no, I told my buddy the other day that last record carried forward problem. I spent some time on it, and then you whipped out a better version very quickly. And then my colleague, who's more of a software engineer, he did it in Bash in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, boy, you just got to be humble because there's always someone smarter than you.
Oh, absolutely.
More tools in their toolkit because I'm a little bit narrow focused.
Yep, absolutely. There's and that's fine. You learn something.
Yeah, I need to practice Bash is what I learned.
And as far now, I will also say specifically terms like expert, unless you are, even if you are.
I've never used that term. I've never used it, and I think, Kevin, though, that's somewhat of a SQL family kind of thing where we are leery about it because I've seen so many resumes that use that term like very, very loosely. And I've learned to be a little less judgmental of that because I think people don't understand how it comes across or that what it actually means. So, yeah, but it is by far the most widely used bad term there is.
I would agree. And
Yeah.
the reason why I consider it bad is you put a big target on your back. Because now you say expert. Great. I get to quiz you on anything related to it. Like I was saying with Polybase expert, I get to quiz you on anything related to it, regardless of how dumb. And you have to get it right because otherwise I call into question, are you really an expert? Whereas if you just say, I have a lot of experience with this. I've got years of experience with Polybase. I've worked with the product team on it. I've implemented it in several companies. Then a person can come to me and say, okay, Kevin, how about this? And I could say, you know what? I don't know. That's a good question. I can speculate, but I don't have an answer. And not come off sounding like a fool. Versus if I come in and say, I am an expert. Well, experts have expertise. And, if you bomb that question, then I ask, if this is what you think an expert is, boy, I don't want to hear what you think about, if your intermediate skills. Oh, you can spell replication. That doesn't make you intermediate at it. Now, one other thing that I will mention, resume-wise. Yeah, this is, I guess, less resume-wise, more job-wise. Always go for jobs you're not qualified for. Because I wonder how an initial resume reviewer would take something like the following. Number 1, I have made 0 sexist/racist comments or jokes. Well, the first thing I'd be thinking of is, okay, about all the other crass and crude
That's so
humor.
funny, Solomon.
Like you
Hilarious.
specified 2 classes. Now I can assume that all of the other classes you've made all kinds of jokes around it. Number 2, stole nothing. Just long-term borrowed. Number 3, no indictments yet. Number 4, spent 0 minutes surfing porn. So 59 seconds technically isn't a minute. Like I get I guess you would definitely be above that bottom rung, Solomon. You'd probably make it to cut number 2 of the resume pile. Uh, I am unlikely to land in jail over the tenure of my time with your organization. But one last thing, when you are looking for jobs, look for something that you're not qualified for, and I mean that completely seriously. If you look at a job and you're 100% qualified for it, you're going to be bored at that job because you already know how to do all of it. It's that, and of course, the company is going to claim
That's
that
non-standard advice, Kevin, for non-standard people. I mean, it totally fits for me. You gave me that advice when I talked to you on my book, and that's what pushed me
Yep.
to apply for this job. But that is very non-standard. That is not something people like or enjoy doing. We have to be weird for that. For the weirdos among us, it's totally valid.
Yes, but then at the same time, if you're watching Shop Talk, you're probably in this group. And I got this, so I got this advice from Sean McCown, and so I do want to give credit to Sean for this. That when you are looking for a position, always look for something that's above you, because and don't lie about it. Never say, "Oh yes, I know how to do merge replication," if you don't know anything about merge replication. But your resume doesn't have to include all of the items. You don't have to include the 40% that you don't know.
So true story. When I was an interviewer once, we were trying to fill a senior DBA role on a team at a very famous company, a healthcare company that I used to work at in Louisville. That was a very well-known, place to work in town, best places to work and all that. And, generally speaking, the culture was good. People enjoyed working there. So when we had an open position there, we used to be flooded with resumes. And one of them stood out in that there was a DBA who claimed that he worked at Microsoft on petabyte databases. So that was his claim, that he supported databases that were petabytes large. So that's not the market norm, especially not 10 years ago. Maybe now it was not the age of big data and such. So it was totally weird. The resume stood out because it was weird. And then, after some research, and then I sent a message to Mark Souza asking, do you really have petabyte databases that people work on? Because I have a resume here saying this guy worked. I think he said he worked on the MSN team or some such thing. I don't remember total details, but turned out that this guy was there for a short time as some sort of an intern kind of a gig, like a contractor gig, short-term contractor, not an intern, short-term contractor gig. And the total size of the sharded database that MSN was using across multiple instances added up to a petabyte. That's what he meant by working on a petabyte database. See.
Right, and he did something very small on it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is the type of thing where don't make claims that you can't back up. If you can back it up, do it. But don't assume that other people can't reach out and go, folks. It is a small enough field.
Yes, that's another thing. Yes.
Yeah, experience with can be very sketchy. I have experience with many things, but can I actually do with them? Nah, probably not.
And I've done probably 10 or 15 hours of Python training, and I can make something go 3+3. But I wouldn't want, even if I hoodwinked someone into being like, "Oh, I'm a junior Python developer," I'd be so stressed out. Like you almost wouldn't. You want to stretch. You want what you just said, that 60-40. You want to stretch in a role like. But you don't want to be a charlatan, because then the worst case scenario, you get the job and you're clueless and you're stressed out all the time.
Yeah. And so this is, again, it's not you're trying to trick someone into giving you a job you're not qualified for. It's more of This is your stretch. Hey, all right, well, you know what? I've never been a database administrator in a very large scale. I've been a database administrator at smaller scale, and I've been a developer, and so here's how I can apply these skills. And, you know, the job requirement says that you need these 20 things. In practice, if you're the right person, I can teach you 17 of the 20. I may only need 3 things, just to have a starting point. But I can teach you the rest of it if you're the right person. And that's where just getting through the marketing system, getting through the HR system, rather, is the major pain. And we're going to close with experience can be sketchy. Experience with can be sketchy. One person said experience with SQL 2012 back in 2012. When asked about that experience, I installed it on my laptop. Yeah, and technically was an experience. But speaking of experiences, we are at the top of the hour. It is time for me to turn back into a pumpkin and get back to work. It's time for Mala and Mike to stop working, hopefully. And hopefully for everyone else to stop working for the night. But tomorrow, we will have a user group meeting. Apologies again about last week. Little scheduling issue. But we will be meeting tomorrow. That will be the last meeting of the year. We'll come back again in January with a whole new slate of speakers. So until we see each other again, everyone, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.